All right, let's jump into things and get back into this project. So for those of you who don't have it yet, feel free to find somewhere on your computer that you want to run this. I have all of my stuff in a CodeTheDream folder. So I'm going to go into my shopping app, but you could get clone this link that I think I just sent in chat. Although I've not done that. Okay, it is there. So feel free to get clone if you want to, and then jump into it. And you'll need to do an npm-i to install all the dependencies. And we'll go from there. Okay, so I'm in my shopping app. I'm going to open that in VS Code, and let's run this just to figure out where we stopped last week. So I'm going to npm run dev, which I believe is the script to start things up. Cool. We'll view this. All right, nothing super exciting yet. We have two products in here, and we have some, I think, very general styling, if anything, just to put things on top of each other. But we need to go ahead and fix all of that pretty soon. So there's a couple of things that I would like to do here. Right now we have two items, but very quickly we would like to have lots and lots of items that people can scroll through. And if we put all of our items on one page, as that list grows, we very quickly run out of space entirely. So it would be better if we could find a way to display items in sort of like a table format. So if I were to go to Amazon and search up books, so this shows up in a table or sort of like in a row almost. This isn't really what I was thinking. Let's search for a specific book. Let's search for Harry Potter. What I'm thinking more along lines of is this table here where we have sort of just a list of different things. They're all of the same general format. We have a picture and lots of information down here about price, rating, who's selling it, things like that. And eventually we'll get to the point of where maybe we start cutting off the table to maybe just like 10 or 20 elements per page. And then we can start adding different pages. We're going to do that pretty far in the future in this class, but we will come back to that. But at least for now, it would be great if we could get this table going and have a bunch of rows of content here. So I think that's a good place to start. The other thing that we're going to do today is we're going to put together a little search bar where we can start searching for our content. The actual table itself hopefully will give us an understanding of passing properties to components, which is something you're going to have to do this week if you haven't done that last week. And then the search bar is where we'll start talking about state, which I think will be the more interesting component and has more complexities to it. But this is where we're going. Any questions about this vision? Well, I put my phone on do not disturb. Okay, cool. So here's what we're going to do. Right now, in my project, I have a list of some items in here. I'm noticing just right away that these both have ID of 0, which is bad. So I'm just going to fix that really quick. And right now, our product data is just living in this app component. So what I would like to do is to put this into a table element. And inside of that table, maybe we have different rows, and we have stylings that apply to the whole table, to those rows, and to individual items within the page. So maybe we start there. We can go ahead and create a table element here. This is an HTML element that you will definitely want to get comfortable with. So when we have a table, we always need to specify either a table header, where we can sort of like input columns for our table and specify the structure of the table. But more importantly here, we don't really want columns. We just want everything to be in the body of the table. So we have our table element, we have our table body. Inside of a table body, we specify one or more table rows, which is just a row of data. And then we can specify however many items we want to have. And those go inside of TD, which stands for table data or table cell. So I just closed it, but I should not have closed it. So let me see if I can open that back up really quick. Harry Potter. I'm thinking this is a pretty good layout here where we have the picture on the left and then we have our content from top to bottom on the right side. So I'm thinking maybe we just start there. Maybe we create like a table data for the left side of things, and then separately a table data element for all the content on the right. So I'm gonna go ahead and move maybe this image up here into my table data. And then the rest of this can go on the right side in our other cell. And we're gonna have to move this this mapping function here, which takes all the data in our array and turns it into elements. And we'll stick that up here. We want one row for each product in our data set. So we'll replace this. Well, so we are returning an element and it's telling us that we need a key, which we'll use product.id here. We need a separate key for each element in our data. And let's see what this does if it compiles. What does this look like? Cool, that looks better. So now we have our image on the left and we have our text on the right. And maybe I want to start applying some CSS here. I think some things that would look good is let's make sure that all of our images are a consistent width. So over here, our image is always a fixed width and a fixed height, but the actual image is sort of like centered on the inside of that. So they're all going to be different sizes. It looks like the width is constrained, but maybe the height is flexible, just depending on how much this box takes up. So we can start with the width here. If I want to apply some CSS here, does anyone have any thoughts about ways that we might go about telling this image how wide it needs to be? Like, how would we apply styling onto this image tag? Well, for one thing, we can just write some styles in line here. So we can give it a JavaScript object, which contains a bunch of properties and values for CSS properties. So maybe I want my image to have a max width of 200 pixels. And so now our image can be smaller if it needs to be, but it will be a maximum of 200 pixels wide, which looks pretty good to me. We can probably make this a little bit bigger. 300 pixels. How about that? Nice. And it can be shorter if it needs to. And let's add maybe some extra padding on the side here. I think this text is too close to the image. So maybe what I'll do is I will grab this table data element and we'll put a div around these three text items and then we'll style that div. And we'll say our margin left is going to be 20 pixels. Give it a little more space. You can do a little more than that. All right, and then I'm noticing all this text is about the same size, but I would like this text to be a little bit different here. So maybe we make this an H2 element rather than a paragraph, which makes it bold. And I would say the price should also be bold, but not as bold. So maybe we make that like an H4. We can do some formatting on the price here. Just so it makes it more clear, and we have a description and stuff like that. Do we have any other data that we're not currently showing? We have a discount. We have a seller. Maybe we'll skip the discount for now, but we can at least put the seller in here. How's that look? All right, this looks okay to me. Let's do one more thing. I personally would like to have a border around these rows so that I can tell where one row ends and the next one begins. So maybe what I would say is on this table row element, let's give this some styles too. And here we can say border. It's going to be 1 pixel solid black. Did that work? No, that did not work. I remember having issues with this in the past. What if we put this on a div instead? Does it work here? Yeah, okay. So I think I need to probably put everything in this table row inside of its own div. So let's do that really quick. So we have our table row. We're going to put a div and style that div instead of styling the table elements themselves. Since that did not work here. Style border 1 pixel solid black. All of these properties I'm using, they're just things that you'll be familiar with the more you use them. So I'm not super concerned at this point if you don't know exactly what these are. Let's do some other stuff here. Maybe we make this width to be 70% of the view width. So it'll take up 70% of the screen, and the orientation here is a little bit weird. I would like these to be centered. So what I will do is I will make this div over here, flex box, and we will align items in the center. Oop, gotta fix it. This should be justify content, and flex direction should be column. Let's try this. Nope, that didn't work either. All right, let's see if we can figure this out. Table data cannot be a child of a div.
Maybe if you wrap it in a div.
Yeah, I thought it was already a div. Let me try and inspect this element that's not working and see if we can figure out why. I don't want to spend too much time on this. We can go back.
Why are you using inline styles if you like rather than like name classes and the style sheet?
We can do that. I was gonna do that next, but just to prove a point, get some stuff on the page first and then go back to it. So hold on 1 second. How about that? Okay.
Maybe you need to specify the amount of columns, like column row.
I would expect this to center here, regardless. Okay, I don't know why this is jumping down to the bottom, but we're going to leave this here for now. In the div element. Yeah, this should be display flex and flexing the column. I'm just surprised that this container is at the bottom of the table data element, which doesn't have any styles. All right, we're going to come back to this. We're going to just let it be gross for a little while, which is not the end of the world. All right, so what I have here right now, which we have just regurgitated, like sort of vomited onto the page here, is a table which has its own data inside of it, and that data is coming from somewhere else. Now, if I wanted to separately in my application somewhere else create another table which has its own data in it, I would have to create like a whole separate table component and specify another table and a table body and a table row and table data elements in there. And a lot of that is probably going to be very similar. If I have a bunch of different tables on my application, I probably want them all to work generally the same way. And so there's going to be a lot of things that are shared between components that use the same sort of thing. Think about also like a button. You're not going to create a separate component for every single button on your application. You're going to create a button component that allows you to pass in things that are going to differentiate that button's usage versus other buttons on your site. So maybe you pass in the text that's going to show up on the button. You pass in some additional style properties that you want to apply to like a default set. Or you specify like, what does that button do when you actually go ahead and click it? And so these things are going to be reusable. And as a result, we generally want to try to have a sort of separation of responsibilities on our application. And one separation of responsibility here that maybe we could have is what is the actual table itself versus what are the elements inside of this table. The table is probably going to look pretty similar through a bunch of different locations in our app. We're not going to make any other ones, but we could if we wanted to. The data we pass to it is going to be different, and how we want it to look maybe has a few tweaks, but overall it could be very similar. So in my opinion, I would recommend that rather than putting all of this stuff together, which is sort of mixing responsibilities, we're having our data, we're creating our table, we're specifying things about the table and how it looks. We're also creating data inside of that table and how that data looks. This is already getting pretty gnarly. We have a lot of levels of indentation here that make it very difficult to sort of follow what's inside of what, and just adds extra levels of complexity. What I would like to do here is I would like to take this and separate it into two different components. A table component, which just specifies what does the table itself do? What can I pass into the table? How does it interact when I do things to it? And a separate component for the actual data that's going to be rendered in the table. And that way, what we can do is we can create our data elements. We can apply stylings to them. We can give them actions. So if I click on this table data, like what's going to happen? If I want to change it, what's going to happen? And we can also separately have a table component and the styles that apply to those tables. Is there hard and fast rule for what has to go in its own file? No. But the reason why we separate components is A, you're going to reuse that component somewhere else. And so we need to make a general version of the component. Or B, I want to split apart this really, really complicated component that has a lot of code that is difficult to follow into individual units of responsibility. So my component should have the content that it's responsible for. And if there's a bunch of content that has its own responsibility that's not really related to that component, then maybe you extract that into its own component. And we reduce some of the difficulty of following all of this code and trying to figure out, okay, well, I have a table and a body and a row and a div and a data and an image. Like that is difficult to follow. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and set up some components here. I'm going to create a folder for our components. And let's create maybe a table component. And we'll make it just a general table for now. We don't need to specify in particular that it has our products in there. But we could if we wanted to. Maybe, yeah, we'll make it a general table for now. And let's specify what a product row looks like. So we'll make this table general, and then we'll make a specific product that we're going to pass into the table. And then we'll replace it here in our app.jsx. So let's start with the table. anytime I have a component, I'm going to go ahead and create table. We're going to just throw in some defaults. We're going to export our component so that we can get it somewhere else. And now we could use that table here if we want to. All right, so we have our table. And we can go ahead and throw some stuff in here. I see a hand raised. Go ahead.
I was looking at your product row component, and I think the other teacher uses an arrow function. He
Oh,
does like
for
cons.
the component definition here.
Yeah, like cons table parentheses. But my question is what's the difference? Is there a difference, or it's just kind of like your personality?
Yeah, this is a good question. Just I'm curious if someone else can jump in here, maybe to help with this explanation rather than me just talking about it. And I'll pick up if there's anything that maybe is worth covering. But does anyone happen to know the difference between specifying like a named function versus an arrow function?
Well, an arrow function, you're using a variable, but to me, they just kind of do the same thing.
On arrow function, we can use this. I know.
Um, I don't know about the use of this. Typically, when I think of the keyword this, I think of referring to like an object from within that object. So if I have a JavaScript class and I have like a method, say hi. So this is something that I can call on this class. Maybe I have a constructor which says when I create a new instance of this class, we're going to do something. Maybe we say this dot name is equal to Eli. Or for a better demo, maybe we'll pass in the name here. And let's say I want to say hi to this person. Well, when I'm writing this method about how that functionality happens, I don't actually know, like when someone's using this class, which particular object they're going to be referencing. Maybe someone creates several of these. Thing one is equal to some class. This is Eli. And then someone creates a thing two, some class equal to Sharice. So in this case, we have two different objects of this class, or two different instantiations. And I don't want to have to hard code who they're saying hi to. I want to say, like, this particular instance of this object, do something with it. And so I say, when I'm creating this new class, whatever we pass in, the new version of this object, this instance or this version is going to have the name property of whatever that gets passed in. And so then I can say console.log, hello, this.name, and so on and so forth. So this is, I keep saying this, which is not good. It's just a word in the English language that I need to use, unfortunately. But this is typically what I would use the keyword this for, which just references the object that is going to eventually exist in the future for a class. There might be something around the use of this for a function. I honestly don't know.
If
but-
I may jump for a moment.
Sure.
So this refers to execution context. And when you use arrow functions, if you console log this in line 4, it will not be the execution context of other func. it will be the global execution context. Whereas if you console log this within some func, then it will be the execution context of that some func. I don't know what you'll get in your log, but that's the main difference, that the arrow function differs the execution context.
Let's try it, see what happens. I don't want to spend too much time on this, and I don't also want to confuse people too much. So source data node functions.js. Okay, in this case, they're both undefined, but I think if I called some func here, maybe that would do something different. Okay. I don't have a good demo here of what he just said, but there is definitely something here. I'm going to just totally throw this out the window and say the number of times that you're going to care about this is probably close to 0. And to sort of refocus here, yes, in general, these functions are exactly the same, but the difference here is that for an arrow function, we are creating an anonymous function that does not have a name necessarily, and sticking it into just some random variable. And I can execute that function by using the variable here. And it looks exactly the same as calling a function that has a name. They work exactly the same. I can console.log these as well.
Yeah, it's okay. I just Googled it. It says regular functions can be called before defined in the code. Arrow functions are defined as variables and are not hoisted, so you cannot call them before their definition in the code. So I guess I was just trying to figure out when to use which, because the other teacher used arrow functions all the time, but I was just trying to figure out when to use which.
For the most part, it's just up to personal preference. There
Okay.
are certainly some edge cases. I think in general in programming, the weird edge cases we try to just stay away from rather than like really digging into them. It's certainly good to know the difference, but one thing that you'll hear from anyone who is doing programming professionally is that anything that we do that is going to introduce complexity or unexpected behavior is bad. And we should be writing code that is as straightforward as possible and not using some crazy JavaScript shit. So I don't have a super in-depth answer for you of the difference, but really it is up to preference here in almost every case. I think
It's
typically
okay. We can
Yeah,
move
yeah.
forward. I just Googled it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention here is that I think arrow functions are a lot more common if you're passing a function as a callback. So if I'm just like declaring a function that's going to be used somewhere, so in this case, like this is a component, I usually declare them as functions, as named functions. Whereas if I have like a button here, and I am using the onClick property of this button, which says, give me a callback function that will be executed in the future when this event happens, when this click event happens. This is a lot more common to use an arrow function for, because we don't need to like specify like a named function out here, handle this particular button click, and then like do some logic here. And then we would reference this function up here and say, this is the function you're going to execute. Rather, it's generally shorthand to just use a quick arrow function here and stick the logic related to this in line. But you could also use a named function here if you wanted to. Something, and specify what this function is going to do. So there's lots of ways of doing this, totally up to personal preference. Okay, I've gone on a long tangent and used a lot of your time. So let's get back to this really quick. So we have our table, and we're going to take some of this from our app.jsx and stick it into our generic table component. Start with everything, and we'll take some stuff out as we need to. Ooh, one thing we don't have here is our data. So we could, just swap out our app.jsx, which imports this data, and stick it into our table, but we don't really want that. What we want is a table that can handle any type of data that we pass it, and be able to render all of that data as expected. So what are we going to do here? What I would say is this data needs to be passed in as a property to this table. So any function that is a functional component, you can pass in a properties object. You don't have to, you can leave it out. The cool thing about JavaScript is you can specify as many arguments as you want. And if you don't want to pass them, then you don't have to. So this property object exists if you want it. You don't have to use it. And if I console.log these properties, we'll open this up in our browser just so we can see what this looks like. We'll comment out this stuff for now that we're not using. Let's go back into our app. We have our table component. Is this compiling? It does look like it is. Oh, not compiling. Oh, it's just not showing anything. It is compiling. But you'll notice that this is an empty object. We're not passing in any properties. So any data that you want to pass from a parent down to a child, we're going to pass as we're declaring this component. And we're just going to use key value pairs. We've already done some of this before. All of these like table rows and these div elements, we're passing properties to them by specifying a name for the property and then a value, which could be a string. It could be something in JavaScript, in which case we need to specify curly braces around it to let the compiler know that something JavaScript-y is in there. In this case, we're using a variable from JavaScript. Or we could use like a math expression or anything like that. But we can pass literally anything we want. I'm going to pass maybe my data here, and we'll pass in our data array, or we'll just pass in dummy products specifically and go from there. Great. So now I have a table and I can choose what data I'm going to pass into it. We can do whatever kind of interesting stuff we want. This is not super generic yet, just because we don't have the ability to make this table work for other kinds of data. So maybe we'll do that later if we have time, but I do want to get to more important stuff. So maybe we'll leave that for another week. But for now, let's jump back into accessing this data. So we chose to call this data. We could call it literally anything we want. Row data, foobar, hello world. Anything works. And if I look now in my editor, you'll see that there are now properties. There's one property which is named data, and it is an array. That's what I have passed to this. And it is an array of our product objects, and we can do whatever we want with them. So how do we access this? That's a question for the table. How do we get data out of this props object?
Props.data.
Yeah. So this is an object. It has key values. We can access whatever key we're interested in and go from there. So it says we're missing props validation here. This is JavaScript trying to cover its ass about not having strong types. In any other language, I would like to know what is going to be in my properties object and what type of data is going to be in there, but that doesn't exist in vanilla JavaScript. So People will typically either use a package called prop types or using TypeScript, which are both things we'll cover at the end of the course. For now, I'm literally just going to turn this off because I don't really want to deal with this right now. I think we turn it off from our ESLint config in this rules section. React/props. What was the name of this? No, come back. I want to know how to disable you. It's React prop type props validation. False, maybe. I don't know exactly. If someone can correct me.
Do you need to put it in a curly bracket?
/prop types. Ignore, skip declared. Interesting. I thought it was just a true false. All right. We're gonna just leave it for now and turn it off if it yells at us again. All right. We have our table. We have our data. Could be anything. One pitfall of properties to be aware of is I can try and access properties, but if I don't pass them, they are going to be undefined. So this other thing, I did not pass this as a property. And so if I refresh my page here, my data, my props object does not have them. And if I were to console.log this other thing, we're going to see that this is undefined. And that's kind of scary. If there's a property that you're requiring for everyone to specify in your components, there's a possibility that you don't pass it. And that's really spooky, which is one reason why we prefer using TypeScript or prop types, just so that you enforce that everything you want is getting passed every time. And that gets a little scary. But we'll leave that for now. We only care about our data. And now we have our data and we're mapping it. But again, this isn't quite a separation of responsibility. There are going to be stylings applied to this table, functionality for the table itself. And so I want to separate what an individual product item looks like. And so what I'm going to do here is I am going to say, let's pull just the stylings for a particular product into its own component. We'll call this product listing. Product is equal to this product object that we currently have. And we'll go ahead and create that component. Start off right there. So
Do you need to add in import React from React?
no, we do not need to do that. This up here, we do not need to do. The only reason we would need to do this is if we wanted to get something from this React object. So I have my React, we can actually jump into this to see what it is. This is like a TypeScript namespace. This is actually much grosser than I thought it was going to be. But this is an object and I can do stuff with it. Like I can get components or fragments or all these other different types or these hooks that we can use. We haven't talked about hooks yet. We'll talk about that in a second. But even then, we don't really need to do that. You may see somewhere that people call react.useState to call hook, but we do not need to do that. We can just call useState here and it'll import it from React. So we can bypass that. That's an old feature of React that we don't have to do anymore. All right, let's keep rolling here. So we have our product listing. It displays our product. It's hovering it in red because we did not export this. We have our table, we have our product listing, which we need to import. And let's see if this shows. Cool, so we're back to discussing CSS here. TD cannot appear as a child of div. Okay, so we got to fix our table listing here, our product listing.
Excuse me, and if we get through the props undefinite, how we can expect array, and how we can check product or something, add try catch, something like that. How we can deal if we get undefinite, not array.
Sorry, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, sure. If we get through props product, not array, we got undefinite, for example. And
okay.
how we deal at try catch for the program, because we get just arrow that we cannot use a map to the undefinite.
Yeah. So if we did not specify this product correctly, then every time that we try and use this product, we're gonna be in for a bad time. So maybe I forgot to put this product equals product, or I accidentally put the wrong thing in here. Maybe I like set this equal to data. So now we have an array rather than a specific product. And our thing is going to explode here in a lot of disgusting error messages. And this is just generally not good. So maybe I have to get rid of this for it to really blow up in our face. Yeah, we got a bunch of errors where it says product is undefined because we're trying to access a property of this object, but the object is undefined. And that's really bad. So ideally, we would write code in a way that does not allow us to accidentally not pass a product here, which you can't do with vanilla JavaScript. Again, advocate for TypeScript or prop types because they actually like enforce for you that the data you're passing is correct and will give you a red squiggle if you do it incorrectly. If you don't want to use either of those, we'll just need to actually like look at what this data is and do something. So if product is not, or let's say if our product is falsy, which is to indicate that our product is equal to, sorry, too much. Our product is equal to null or undefined or an empty string or 0 or some just unexpected thing, then maybe I want to return a separate, like a separate layout here that says just there is no data here. And so now my page doesn't blow up and it has an alternative representation for this because I don't yet have my data. So that's one way of doing it. You can like, check based on like what the actual data itself is. You can also assert on the type of this object. So we can get type of product. And I would expect this to be an object, but it's not going to be. It's going to be undefined, which is scary. So if I do actually fix this and pass the right products, we're now going to see that this type is an object. And so I could say if type of product is not equal to object, then we return that makeshift thing here and say there is no data here. We have the same thing. I would have to actually take this back out to see that result. But yeah, we're back to our alternative representation. So either of those work, but in real life, I would not advocate for doing this. I would advocate for just using TypeScript. Good question though. All right, we're gonna speed run this really quick. So we talked about props. One other thing to mention right here that you might see is different ways of handling properties rather than grabbing props.product. We can do something called object destructuring, which is to say, grab a bunch of different keys from an object. So this is going to create a variable named product. And maybe we could pull out, I don't know, text size as well. And then what we're doing is we're saying grab all the keys that are named product or text size and put those values into a variable named the same thing. And so my product variable here is going to be exactly the same. This text size we could use, maybe we set our style here, size equal to my text size. And then I go in here to my product listing and say, my product data is what I'm passing. My text size is equal to, I don't know, arbitrarily, maybe like 20 points or 20 pixels. And so that's going to make our font size larger here. And we have pulled all of our properties at once into different variables. And so down here, I don't have to say props.product.name and props.product.seller. So these are equivalent, whichever one you want to do. I usually do some destructuring. I think it looks prettier. You can also literally do this in the like header up here of your function. So I could do this, which says this first thing is going to be an object, and I want to just automatically destructure into these variables. And this also works exactly the same. So you might see any of these. I personally prefer this. I think this looks the cleanest. Okay, really quick, I want to jump on to talking about some state. We'll maybe go like 5 minutes over, but not talk about it too long. So let's say I want to have a component where I have a search bar and I can search for a specific product in my page. So let's create a search bar.jsx function search bar. We'll give it no properties for now. We'll export default search bar. Let's go put this on our app here. Actually, no, it's related to the table. The table filters data. So maybe I just want my search bar to live inside of my table component. So maybe we put like a div here and say we can have multiple things here, and we have our table and we have our search bar component. I will make this live inside of our table. So what does a search bar have? A search bar is going to have probably an input element where we can specify what is the actual thing that we're going to search. And maybe it has a paragraph, which is just like a label for this. You will more formally make a label in a future assignment, but we're just gonna make a random paragraph for now, for time. Product, we'll call this filter or search for products.
Will it need a button?
Yeah, we probably do need a button here. Actually, even better, why don't we just make this a form element? So inside of our form, we're going to have this input to the form. And then we're going to have a button, which is going to be a submit button. So when I hit enter, it's going to submit this form. Actually, probably don't need this div right now. So here's what's going to happen. I have my search bar up here. We'll put some text in this button so it's much larger.
You need a label?
We're going to use this as our label for now. We're not going to stick a label element on there just for the sake of time. But maybe I want to search for lamp, and then I hit my submit button, and you'll notice that it's going to refresh the page. That's the default behavior of a form. What generally used to happen is we would send our data away, and it would send us back like a new page to render with our form submission. That's not usually the pattern that we do anymore, at least from React. React is a single page application, so you're not like going to a different website. You're not getting a new index.html page from the server. It all happens just through JavaScript manipulating components. And so we don't in React ever really want our page to refresh automatically like this. And so instead, what we're going to say is when this form is submitted, let's handle this event, handle form submission. And we'll make this function really quick. And one thing to just note is that this will always give us an event that we can operate on. Let's console.log this event just to see what's in there, but we're going to event.prevent default, which in this case is the default behavior of refreshing the page. So now if I hit my search button, it's not going to refresh, and it's instead going to give us this event object, which has all kinds of different things we can do to it. Most interestingly, we have this target, which is the actual form that was submitted. And we have like the inputs that are part of this form, the button that's part of this form, a bunch of different like functions we can call, and lots of different properties that we can access of the form. We're not going to do anything with a lot of these. But what we are going to do is say that if we wanted to get the value inside of this input, what we would normally do is get event.target, and then we need to get the 0th element, I believe. I haven't done this in a while, so bear with me if this doesn't work. And this should be our input element. Cool, so we have our input, and from this input, I can get the value of this input. And this gives me back whatever the current state of this thing is. Cool, so I have my lamp, or I can search for a chair. All right, so this is one way of doing things. The sort of difficult thing here is that we don't have any access to this data until we get that submission event. We could add another event on here of this input, like on change. So when my input changes, maybe we console.log event.target, which gets the input that's running this event and the value. And we can do stuff with it here if we want to. This is totally fine. Something. So you'll see as we type, it gets the new value. But typically what we want to do instead is maintain the state of our forms so that we can do a bunch of different side effects on them. And so we create what's called a controlled component. And so again, this is what you guys are going to do in this upcoming assignment. We use state for this component to say, what is the current data that lives in this particular instance of a component? I may have 3 different search bars on my app. They will all have different state at any given moment in time. They will have the same state properties, the same state data elements, but the actual values of those data elements are going to be different just depending on how those components are interacted with. And so what we do is we call this use state hook. we give it a default value. So I'm going to say that the data that we need to maintain here is the actual item inside of our input. So what do we have in our input? We have a string, which is going to start empty. And this use state hook, it doesn't help me here, but it returns two items, which we're going to do array destructuring for. And so we need to give our state a name. So this is going to be our search term. And then we get a function to update the state internally to a new value. So we usually just do the name of this state plus set in front. So set search term. And again, it's not going to give me a whole lot of great IntelliSense here, but you can sort of parse through these really disgusting types here and see that this is a dispatch function, which sets a new value for the state. So what is actually happening here under the scenes? Well, React is maintaining these just variables under the hood that belong to a particular instance of a component. And every time that component re-renders, it is asking React to give me whatever that current state value is. And it gives me whatever the state is in a variable and a function to, under the hood in React, set it to a new value. When I call this the first time, there's not going to be anything there. The state doesn't exist yet. And so it's instead going to it's going to create that data. It's going to give it this default value, and then it's going to give me back that new data that it created in the setter function. So the first time your component renders, it should use this default value, and otherwise it will use whatever the previous version that you set it to was. And the state is what controls if this component should re-render or not. So if I change my state, my component is going to look different because my component depends on that state to inform what it looks like. And so anytime you change state, you should expect that your component is going to re-render. So if I set a new search term, then my search bar is going to change, and so on and so forth. So here's what I would like to do. I would like to say, when my input changes, I want to set my search term to be the new thing that I'm searching for. So event.target.value. Maybe we can also just add a side effect in here. Let's say if we'll leave that out for now. I was thinking maybe we could do something like if it's empty, let's set our input to be red. But I would rather do that from somewhere else rather than this onChange function. But a controlled component is where I have like an input. Specifically, it's usually an input or like a toggle of some kind. And I say the value is always going to be whatever my state says that it should be. And when it changes, update my state. And so now I have access to whatever the current search term is from everywhere in my component. I can have like some random code that executes every time my component runs and just prints out whatever the search term is. This is a very basic thing, but right now it's an empty string, something cool here. So every time my component changes, because that state is updating, it's going to print out the new value. Or eventually we'll do something called a use effect, which just runs an arbitrary function that does something. But those are things that depend on our state. And so our controlled component says the value of this input is going to be whatever our state currently is, and let's update the state every time we need to. So state belongs to a specific component. That component is going to re-render if your state changes, and any components that are under that component. Like if I had my form and then I had like some other component here, and maybe I pass my search term or like some other property that derives from the search term. Well, when the state changes, we also need to re-render all those subcomponents that are further down in the tree. And so it's going to re-render everything else there. But everything higher than this doesn't need to re-render because nothing about it has changed. So last thing to mention really quick, I'm sorry, I'm way over time. We spent a good amount of time talking about random stuff, which is my fault for getting too distracted. Because this state only exists here, let's say I want my table to be able to filter based on whatever the current search term is. Well, I don't have access to that in the table. The state lives here in the search bar. And so there's different ways we can do this, but generally we use props and state to pass data down a tree, and then we pass functions down the tree that allow those deeply nested components to like trigger an action higher up in our table. So maybe I have like another piece of state here, which is filter, set filter is equal to use states. Actually, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to take this search term. No, we're not. We're going to create a new piece of state for this, and you'll see why in a second. So we're going to create a new piece of state, which is our filter. And I only want to show products that start with that. So maybe here inside of my mapping function, if product.name, yeah, they have a name. So if product.name contains my filter, then I'm going to return that product. Otherwise, I'm going to return null, which is to say, don't render anything. And I think this is not going to work. Use state. Oh, and import this product. About this products.name.contains. Okay, let's do this a different way. Let's say our filter data is equal to our data, which is an array, and an array has a filter function. Item, and if we return true, then it's going to keep it. Otherwise, it's going to discard it from this new array we're creating. So if item dot index of, okay, that's what we need instead. So if return item dot name dot index of my filter is not equal to -1. So index of is a function that looks for something in a string and returns the index where that occurrence happens. So if our index is somewhere greater than 0, then we know it is in the string. And if it's -1, that's what's returned if there is no occurrence. So we're going to filter out anything that does not agree with our filter up here. And then we're only going to map those products instead, which is nothing because actually, it should be everything, right? An empty string.
On line 9, you're calling that filter on an empty array. So
Yeah.
that's what.
Great. Thanks for catching that. Filter. Oh, not filter. We want it on data, or we'll just do props dot data here. All right. So an empty string appears in all these strings. There's no problem there, but I want to update this filter when I search for a new item. So I need some way to get this data here back up into my table to say, put a new filter on the table. And so what I do is I use a property and pass it to my search bar, set new filter. And this is my setter function. So update the state in the table when this is called. And the search bar now has properties, this set new filter property. And when we submit our form, we're going to say set new filter to be this search term The state is our up-to-date version of whatever's in the input at any moment in time. So I don't have to get that like event.target.value. I could if I wanted to, but the point of doing this is that we just have access to the state. So our search term is going to be the new filter. And then let me clear out our search term here and set this back to an empty string. So what's happening? We are submitting a form. We are canceling the default event. We are setting the new filter, which passes data up our tree into our table. We can't directly, like we don't have any direct way to pass data back into a table. But we can give it a function that the table defines, and the table decides how that data is going to happen. And then we give that data to the function instead. So now, if I start typing in here, it's only going to update my search bar because I haven't submitted yet. But if I submit my form, now it passes that new filter back up into the table, which clearly it still doesn't quite work here. Set new filter. Oh, this is the props validation thing. No, that's not what I want. I just want to disable you. Console.log filter. Let's make sure that this works. Lamp. Okay, so our filter is correct, but probably this down here is not working correctly. Oh, it's because I compared everything with case sensitivity, which is usually bad. So probably what I want to do is do item.name.toLowercase and compare it against filter.toLowercase. And that way it doesn't matter what case I type in, upper or lowercase, it's going to match it regardless. And so now, even though this is uppercase lamp, I can search lowercase, it'll still work. Cool. And now we have a search bar. So the general pattern is data goes down and callbacks also go down. And then you can use that callback to send data back up the tree and go from there. All right, I'm way over. I will stick around for questions if there are any, but I also don't want to take up any more of your time. Thanks to all of you guys who stuck around, which appears to be like literally all of you, which is crazy. But feel free to stick around and ask questions, or if you have to leave, feel free to drop. Make sure you do the sign-in form just so I can record that you were here, and I will attempt to post this recording as soon as possible. All right, have a good night for everyone who's dropping. All right, any questions or concerns? I kind of just like sped right at the end, so I'm happy to slow down and re-explain some stuff if that was confusing. Okay, doesn't sound like there's any questions. If there are any questions when you come across your homework, feel free to reference this recording. You'll be doing like basically the exact same thing for your assignment, or send me a Slack message or any of your other mentors. Have a good weekend, everyone. Talk to you guys next Thursday.